You having memory problems? It's okay if you are. You did get knocked in the head pretty hard. And you are on a lot of drugs. What are you doing? That isn't weird at all.
Anger issues, that one.
Headshot! Rampage! Engine of destruction!
Stupid virus. Seriously, you need to get a grip.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the May GGDA meeting. Yeah. Thank you all very much for showing up. Tonight we have a disembodied voice with us, Dave Boyles, who will be giving you more than embodied knowledge on a lot of good topics. So very much appreciate Dave for joining us from Pennsylvania tonight, not Philadelphia, from Pennsylvania, and Ryan for having set this up. But before we go into this, I'd like to let you all know a little bit of what's going on with us before we start the main presentation. First of all, thanks to our Patreon, Stephen Coffey, Burton Posey, Lee Friedman, James Simpson, Trey Carpenter, and Puzzled by Joe here in the audience with us right now. Yay! Great people all. You can sign up for our Patreon at Georgia Game Dev to get a lot of great videos and other information that's not otherwise publicly available. We are patreon.com/Georgia, spelled out, Game Dev, all one word, Georgia Game Dev. And we are that on most social media. Subscribe to our YouTube if you don't. A lot of good game dev videos, over 600 game development videos on our YouTube from various conferences, presentations like the one we're about to have, and more. Again, YouTube/Georgia Game Dev. We're on Mixer at mixer.com/Georgia Game Dev. So one of the few places where we're not Georgia Game Devs is on Twitter and Instagram. There we are GGDA_org. So get on our Twitter. If you're not part of our Facebook group, that's a very active group. Lots of good information, a lot of good ability to share knowledge and tips and tricks. GGDA.org on Facebook. For those of you who haven't already signed up to Speak at Siege, our call for speakers is up right now. We've got a handful of former speakers here, and we're always glad to have more of them. We've got a few upcoming events. Obviously, May 24th, the big one is the Career Fair and Esports event at MomoCon. The Career Fair is free. I already know that High Res will be there. I know that Blue Mammoth will be there. I know that Floyd County, which does Archer TV show, is going to be there. I know that Control Freak is going to be there. Hey, Stephen. I know that we've got a bunch of great folks showing up there. And then, of course, the gel competition. Over $6,000 in scholarships for people playing Brawlhalla, Smite, and Paladin. Talk to me for more about that if you already know about it. And, of course, all that's at ggda.org. Next Tuesday at 8 p.m., I know we have gotten a few artists here. We're going to have a Blender workshop or live streaming. So if you've been wanting to work with Blender, Blue Hat Zach will be live streaming at 8 p.m. on all of our channels, that Blender workshop. And our June 12th meeting, Atlanta meeting, will be next month at Georgia State University at their Creative Media Industries Institute. So looking forward to a great presentation there. One of their teams, they're getting ready to crank out some very good game titles. Of course, check out our merch on Cafe Press. And if you are a streamer, we are trying to form that Georgia network of streamers. So make sure that you reach out to us, let us know what channels you stream on, and we'll share it with you. And I'd like to introduce our host for the evening from the Microsoft store, telling you more about what they're doing here, Jerome.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming out, and thank you for GGDA for actually allowing us to host you guys here. A couple things about our store. Again, I'm the community development specialist here, so I'm over the outreach for the store location. But a couple things we do inside the store. We're kind of like a one-stop shop. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys use PC. So if you actually bought your PC from Best Buy, Walmart, wherever it is, as long as it's running Windows 7 and up, we can actually fix your computers for free. So as long as we're not actually replacing any parts or anything like that, usually our services are kind of free. So come in, see what we can actually do for you, see if we can fix it, right? Next thing is that we have a lot of free workshops for small business owners, education, STEM, things like that as well too, for kids, young adults, as well as older senior adults, pretty much. So check our website out. We have a lot of things going on. I think throughout the rest of this month is Small Business Month. We also have a challenge for anybody that owns their own small business or their own startup company. There is a $20,000 giveaway that we're doing, sort of like a Shark Tank event. So if you have a pitch that you want to give to us, there's a computer over here to the right-hand side. You can go ahead and take about 30 seconds out of your time throughout the event. Pitch your idea for like 30 seconds, send it off to corporate, and they will actually fly one person from each Microsoft store location across the U.S. to Miami to compete for $20,000. So free trip, free money, right? But again, check our website out. Find out what we got going on inside the store, education websites, STEM workshops, as well as business workshops.
Thank you, Jerome. Jerome, and thank you to Microsoft for hosting us. And definitely appreciate all the support. And really looking forward to our session with Dave Boyles before. He has actively supported us in the past, but this is the first time I think we've actually had him speaking. So I'm going to do a very quick intro to him. And assuming that my notes will pop back up for me and won't just drift away on me. And then we're going to take a short break and then get on into the meat of the presentation. Wow, my notes have all just disappeared. That's wonderful. All right. Well, I tell you what, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to come back with Dave Boyle.
Thank you for your interest in the Georgia Game Developers Association's Patreon campaign. The Georgia Game Developers Association is a nonprofit that focuses on educating both game developers and fans on what is involved in making great games. For years we have put on live events to do just that, attracting some of the greatest thinkers in game development to share their secrets. Recently, we began our live streaming channel on Mixer to expand our ability to reach those developers and gamers far beyond our state. We have seen some initial success, but we are also hearing a lot of requests for more. More workshops, more in-depth interviews, more first looks at indie games, more giveaways, and more great streams. Your support will allow us to do just that. Even at starting levels, we both recognize your support and seek your input on what to stream. At higher levels, you can actually help shape our content, gaining priority access to our speakers, the chance to share announcements, and, at the highest level, running ads and promotions for all our viewers to see. So join now to get the inside scoop on game development and to help shape one of the best game dev channels on the net.
Welcome back to our GGA May meeting. Thank you all for bearing with us. And very excited to have Dave Boyles here. As I mentioned before, support our efforts before. We've had a lot of great success with the Microsoft Technical Evangelists. Diego, Glenn, we've had a bunch of them have helped us out. One of the things we haven't had them do is give us a good presentation on Xbox development. It's something we've needed for a while. So Dave is the man, the geek who can speak on this topic. Before being at Microsoft, he was a senior software engineer at Comcast, working on the product development team and specifically on Xbox consoles. So this conversation will not just be on Xbox. Dave has very graciously agreed to speak about the other consoles as well. And because we've had a lot of requests for some presentations on mixed reality, he's agreed to take that on as well. So he's kind of doing everything tonight. So with that, Dave, take it away.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It is a packed room.
You put a lot of people into that Microsoft space. I like it.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. I can see the Mixer stream right now too, so this is great. I see what's happening in Mixer, see what's happening here. So this talk, we're going to make it about not only developing on Xbox, I say Xbox here, but really consoles as a whole. We'll talk about some others, but also mixed reality. And a lot of these slides are put together with Sarah Sexton, one of my peers over in Chicago, as well as Nick Landry, who's one of my peers based out of New Jersey. So with that in mind, let's get started. So the first thing we have here is consoles as a whole, right? Today, it's easier to make games than ever before. We have PlayStation, we have Switch, and then we have the Xbox. These are accessible to anybody and everybody right now. So with that in mind, let's get started. So consoles really are still a closed platform, right? They demand quality over quantity. It's not just like Steam where you can release a game, get it out the door, and that's it. Consoles, because it is still a bit of a walled garden, they're going to want to see that you've got something great. So in that regard, they want to see that you're serious as a developer. That means you're probably going to have to look at things like get registered as a company or a sole trader, sole proprietor, secure authentication, have a track record of some sort. Now, it doesn't mean you have to have released AAA in the past. Even releasing on a mobile platform or a web game works very well for a lot of these console manufacturers as well. They just want to see that this isn't, a very weekend project you're going to put a couple hours a week into, because you have to remember they're also dedicating resources to you when they're assigning a dev account manager to work alongside you and make sure your title gets launched. You also may have to have a VAT or value added tax number, which is very prominent in Europe, or a tax number here in the States. So you're going to have to be a business just like you would for anything else. The big three, I'm sure as you're aware of, are Xbox One, Microsoft, which you're probably going to be going through our ID at Xbox program, or we have something called our Creators Club. For Sony, they have the PS4, and the Vita seems to have fallen by the wayside. And then finally for Nintendo, we have both the 3DS as well as the Switch, which I'm sure you're aware of. And really the Switch, for their indie titles, have really started to come to prominence in the last 6 months or so. There was a bit about it at GDC, the Game Developer Conference in San Francisco, earlier this year. But also we saw quite a few indie titles on the Switch being showcased at PAX East in Boston just last month. So you might hear about something called the parity clause. This comes up from time to time. So the big three, Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, will often expect simultaneous releases across all consoles, right? In the mind of the console maker, look at it this way. If the features are the same, the release date ought to be the same as well. They don't really want to obviously give the competition any kind of leverage or head start. Otherwise, potentially if you were to release on different times, they're going to say, we're probably going to want some kind of unique features that can justify the late arrival. Maybe on Xbox you have something like leaderboards, you're tying into achievements, or some unique feature at that point. Maybe you're tying into Mixer like we have here right now. Those are going to be the kinds of things that the platform stakeholders are really going to want to market as well. Think about something like PlayStation 4 when that launched. You had that beautiful side-scrolling shooter, Resogun, right? Voxel-based 3D graphics, tons of beautiful lighting. That was a showpiece for all of the power that not only the engine, but the PS4 hardware could use at that point. So the console manufacturer is going to want to work with developers who are really showcasing what they're doing. And finally, you may want to speak to your DAM. I mentioned this before, your development account manager for more information for negotiation. So everything is negotiable. I would encourage you to speak to them as well. So the process begins, simply enough, name, address, website, and potentially your games that are already released. Again, they don't necessarily have to be console games, right? Chicken before the egg, but something to show that you're serious about this, whether it's web, mobile, or maybe you've created on some other platform before, like Steam. So some of the expensive items. This is where things start to add up. Because remember, it's a business like anything else. You're going to be required to have errors and omissions insurance. This covers intellectual property, copyright violations. People will come after you for anything and everything. So it's always better to have yourself covered. Using an insurance broker, right? One of the cheaper insurances might be something to the tune of about $2,000, which may seem like a lot at first, but if you plan on making several tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars from your title, in the grand scheme of things, this is very, very small. So insurance is going to be important, but also you have to consider things like, will some of your game players be sensitive to lights? Right? If you have too many lights going off, someone may go into a seizure. So you've got to protect yourself against things like that as well. And that's largely where this comes from. Optional, foreign country ratings boards. So to release in foreign countries outside of the States, your game must be rated by official boards. So things like PEGI, maybe you've seen that launch before, trailer before. Really on a country or region by region basis is what's going to cost. Also, the United States, we have what's called the ESRB, Entertainment Software Rating Board. This rose to prominence in around 1994, shortly after the release of games like Night Trap and Mortal Kombat. There are tons of videos that you could see about this, I'm sure, that were essentially the United States government, when Nintendo had brought the developers of Night Trap, Digital Pictures, to court, they'd said to the games industry as a whole, well, you have the opportunity right now for either the government to regulate you or the games industry can regulate themselves. And the games industry chose to do it themselves, which for the most part seems to have worked out very, very well. Moving on, startup costs. So, expenses to get your studio up and running. Everything's going to cost money. Adobe Premiere, Photoshop, Unity, Unreal. For Windows licenses, for single developers, $20. For a company, $100. Not too bad. Often, if you're a student or you have a .edu address, that can be a great way to perhaps consider circumventing some of these costs. Maintain your game's domain name. So, my website is davevoyles.com. I've got to pay a fee every year so I can keep that. You may want to do the same for your game. In terms of hardware, most of these things you might have anyway, particularly if you have a computer. Maybe a video capture device. I use an Elgato, or there's another device, HD Gamer Extreme, works very well. So a bunch of small things that are going to add up. Maybe a workspace, but a lot of these things you can write off on your taxes at the end of the year too, particularly a workspace, or if you have a workspace at home, like where I'm streaming from right now. Okay, so let's go into the developer roadmap. So with that in mind, we've covered some of the costs, and I'll get into the console costs as well too. So if you're going to develop for Microsoft's platforms, right, we have traditional Windows desktop applications. These are often called Win32 because they're often 32-bit apps. Then we had UWP, Universal Windows Platform, which we released several years ago. This is where you release into the Windows Store that you might find on your Windows 10 machine, as well as the ability to release through things like the ID at Xbox program. So for most of these platforms, you'll have an emulator available to you through Visual Studio, the programming environment. But also, we have what's called a standard XDK-based console development. So those are the dev kits. They look very similar, if not identical, to the development kit, to the Xboxes that you might use at home, a retail unit. So The hardware inside is slightly different. Often it has more RAM so that you have more space to allocate storage during development. It allows you to run what's called unsigned code onto your console. And when you sign up for the ID at Xbox program, they will send you 2 dev kits to start. Alternatively, what you can do is you can, if you do the Xbox Creators Program, is you can turn your retail unit into a development unit and test directly on that. You can buy additional Xboxes. I don't know what the costs are off the top of my head for the development units. I'm guessing it's perhaps $1,000 per console, but again, it's been about 2 or 3 years since I had to buy any of those. And even so, that is extremely affordable. When I was at Comcast, the development kits for Xbox 360 were $10,000 a piece, and we had several of those at each desk. So when you think about $10,000 for a 360 dev kit compared to what these cost today, and the fact that you get several for free to start, it's a huge, huge cost savings. So for Microsoft, we have several platforms you can go towards, or programs, I should say. You can apply for the ID at Xbox program. If you're accepted, you get 2 free dev kits and a Unity Pro license for free. This process might take several weeks or even a month because there are just so many applicants. You can go to xbox.com/developers/ID and apply there. Very straightforward to get started. Often, if you know someone at Microsoft, you can reach out to them and see if they could perhaps vouch for you to consider expediting the process. But yeah, even once you get into the program, you're probably going to reach out to the ID at Xbox team, maybe on a monthly basis to let them know, hey, here's a PC build of my game, maybe some gameplay videos, some screenshots, things to get them excited because they're always going to be looking to highlight the best content on the platform as well. And again, creating an Xbox One application and Windows 10 application are going to be very, very similar. So the ID at Xbox process, again, you're going to register over there for regular updates. You're going to submit your concept and sign an NDA. Also, we have what's called a GIF, Game Information Form, and then you'll discuss with them whether or not you also want to build for something like Windows 10, Xbox One, or both. And there's a number of reasons for that. If you want access to Xbox Live, there are certain features that are available on one platform or compared to the other. But those details change every few months, so I don't want to get too detailed here. When you start to build, you're going to have access to the SDK. That's the software development kit, which allows you as the developer to talk directly to the hardware itself, as well as things like achievements or Xbox Live leaderboards. You'll often get quite a few pieces of middleware. I know that for people on the technical side who want to write games, C and C++ work across the board. That means you're going to have to use something like DirectX to get your graphics running on an Xbox. Alternatively, you could use an engine like Unity or Unreal Engine. They play just as fine on the console, as well as our hardware devices like the HoloLens. Then finally, you can publish and certify your game at no cost. So you're good to go, get out the door. But your best bet is to market along the way as you're making these things and keep the team in touch because they may want to know about how your game's progressing so that they could potentially highlight it at events like GDC, like PAX. Going from there, so Xbox One, farewell Xbox Live Indie Games. That was really the start of a great program that we had in 2008, and that's how I got started with game development, which was using XNA, which many of you are perhaps aware of its open source implementation called Monogame today. So it allows you to write C# to make video games, still a very popular solution. So in last year, we closed down that Xbox Live Indie Games program, which allowed developers to release games for not only Windows, but also the Xbox 360 for only $100 a year. Building from that, we have what's called the Xbox Live Creators Program. So look at it as we sunset or put to sleep the Xbox Live Indie Games program and replaced it with Xbox Live Creators Program. Open to all. That means this is probably your best bet if you're brand new to game development, is use this as a stepping stone to go to ID at Xbox. So you can build an Xbox Live enabled UWP game for both Xbox and Windows 10. So great for indies, students, and small game developers with just a few steps. And you can find more about it, again, at the Developers/Creators Club program. We also have several videos on Channel 9 that'll walk you through the process of turning your retail Xbox, straight from the store, into one that you can develop on. Okay, I briefly covered this before, but again, you're going to enroll in that Dev Center program to get started. You're going to sign up as a developer just using an email address. And then from there, you're going to read the documentation to figure out how to get Xbox Live, leaderboards, matchmaking, achievements brought into your games. So once you sign up for this Creators Club program, again, the stepping stone, what are you going to get? We're going to get community and engagement building tools, right? Things like Beam, they used to call it Beam, now we rebranded as Mixer, interactive live streams, which you're already using right now. Great way for the developer and the audience to go back and forth with one another and get a feel for what they're doing, but also for the audience to interact with the game and the streamer. Game hubs, which are publisher-managed experiences to draw players into a community setting and share or celebrate game media news. So look at this as a way to really highlight, again, big events that are happening in your game. You look at someone like Epic Games with not only their Unreal Engine, but the recent popularity of Fortnite. Today they just released a crossover with Thanos from the Marvel Universe, and it's been an absolute hit. So now what they're doing is highlighting people who are playing as this character in the game and showcasing not only the Marvel franchise, but also Fortnite. So you might consider doing the same thing for your game hub as well. Clubs, again, player-managed experiences to create communities around a common game. I joined a club for Morrowind, which I play online for the Xbox, or Elder Scrolls. You might consider creating a club for your game as well. And finally, party chat, right, which is just low latency. If you're already playing with Xbox, you're familiar with it already. So again, Creators Club, cross-platform for everything. Surface, Xbox One, or even the HoloLens, which I'll get into briefly. And I'll come into some of these in just a moment. Again, open source, so you can go to GitHub today and find all of these tools available to you. So even if you're not a developer, this will still have quite a bit of documentation to give you an overview of what this is about. You can use user voice, which I actually used both before I started working at Microsoft and now. And user voice is essentially a poll or voting system for you to make feature requests and see how far in demand that feature is. So if you find another feature that someone else has requested, you can click a button to upvote that, very similar to how Reddit works, and that's what's going to grab Microsoft's attention right away so that we know what should we focus or prioritize our time on. You can submit pull requests. Pull requests are simply a way of you writing code or making changes and submitting them back to us. Maybe there's some kind of feature you wanted to add, or there's some kind of bugs that you wanted to fix. This is a great way not only to get involved with the gaming community, but also to get a job. I know that I end up making pull requests to our own documentation and code each week. So this is very active, or an active way of contributing on GitHub, both internally as employees, but also externally, and a great way to highlight your work. If you're looking to get a job in the tech industry, for someone on the outside to see that you're very active on GitHub and particularly contributing to other people's code, that shows that you're very involved, you can figure things out, and that you're very likely to share your work. Okay, so we've covered a bit of Xbox. Let's get into the good stuff. Let's get into PlayStation as well. So PlayStation 4, right now we have our PS4 Pro as well. Another great platform. I'll tell you right away, I own all the gaming devices at this point simply because we like playing games in this house. So with PlayStation, you can barter for what you need. Timing, right? When the year does need to launch. Exclusivity. Does your title need to be exclusive to the platform? If so, maybe how long? You can also talk about things like marketing and funding to Sony. So Sony also has what's called a pub fund. So the pub fund is where Sony doesn't own your IP or rights, but what happens is you're essentially creating a bet with Sony that says you can get an advance on sales. So say, for example, I was to create a game. I reached out to Sony and said, I want to have timed exclusivity, meaning I want my game to come out on your platform 6 months before anywhere else. But up front, I want some kind of guarantee that I'm going to get paid. I potentially want perhaps $10,000 up front, which could be great for you if your game perhaps doesn't sell too well to start. But at the same time, because you're taking that money up front, very similar to how books or book royalties work, they are going to get a larger portion, if not maybe the entire portion, to start of your cut. So if you go to sell your game for maybe $20 a piece, Sony may say, hey, we'll give you $10,000 up front. So if you had spent $10,000 creating the game, right away you're going to make every dollar back. You're breaking even. But there's no guarantee that you're going to sell that number. So it's kind of like you're hedging your bets. Going from there, we have Nintendo, right? As an indie, start focusing exclusively on Switch and 3DS. Nintendo's self-publishing program is still very new. They're kind of opening up to the idea of indies. There's really just larger titles on it at this point. So if you're going to create games, again, I briefly touched on this before, C and C++ work on every single console, largely because you can write both DirectX and OpenGL on those platforms. There's also a lot of tools that can help abstract a lot of that. So for example, you can use something called SDL, Simple Direct Media Layer. And SDL sits on top of both OpenGL and DirectX, sits on top of those graphics libraries, and it'll abstract things like input, sound drivers, graphics, so that it'll work across more platforms and make your job much easier. SDL is available in a number of languages, C, C++, I think even Python and Java at this point. So that's for really the low-level programmers, but you're going to have to make a lot of your own tools. Unity and Unreal 4 also work on the Switch as well as Xbox and PlayStation. For most people, that is probably your best bet. I know Nintendo does loan dev kits for 1 year. There's an opportunity to buy refurbished dev kits, but the cost is roughly about $800 per dev kit. So you can go to developer.nintendo.com to get some more information. So console development environment. So an SDK, software development kit, is downloaded from each company and installed. You'll probably be using a tool like Visual Studio, an IDE, to communicate with this development environment, or to communicate your code with all of these platforms. It's a Microsoft product and probably one of the more well-known developer tools out there. There are a bunch of tools available for profiling bottlenecks on both the Xbox and PlayStation. We have something called Pix, which I used quite a bit when I was writing C++ on the Xbox. So that's for much lower level stuff. But for the most part, the tools available to Visual Studio and something like Unity or Unreal will work fine for most people. We're going from there. The community is a huge part of making games, right? So if the console makers don't believe you have a great game, they'll not be quick to get back to you. But if you show great promise as a developer, all three of these companies will have opportunities to loan or potentially give you the dev kits for free. So to kind of showcase what you're doing, you may want to work with the community to highlight your game, get out there on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook. So it's a lot of work to be making a game as well as promoting it at the same time, but it's probably in your best interest. I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone work on something, spend years in a corner just kind of building something in their own little bubble, only to release it 3 or 4 years later, not realizing that the entire industry has shifted or that they just haven't drummed up any support the entire way. I highlight a bunch of Chicago resources here. Again, these are all from Sarah, who's very involved in the gaming community over there. I actually had her on my podcast a few months ago. It's called the Indie Dev Podcast. And if you look up my name or Sarah's, you can see her in an older episode where she talks about all the activity that they're doing in the Chicago game developer scene. For GDC presentations, I'll have a lot of these slides available afterwards, so you can check out all these presentations. But GDC is the Game Developer Conference. It happens every year in San Francisco. It is the world's largest gathering of game developers. If you want to get involved in the industry, I would encourage you to take a look at it. It can get a bit pricey for about 5 or 6 days there each year. It cost me about $2,300. But I've been going every year since 2010, and it just continues to get more and more worthwhile for me. But it's a great way to network, to see what's happening in the industry, to get your name out there, and to showcase what you're doing. Often what they'll do afterwards is they will open up a lot of their videos for free through YouTube. This is from last year's presentations. We just finished the conference for 2018 in March of this year. So you probably have a couple weeks, if not months, before they release several of those videos. But this will give you a great understanding of how to develop for some of the platforms I highlighted today. So with that done, let's move on to the really juicy stuff, and that is mixed reality. So this is for HoloLens, and I say immersive VR headsets because we're going to cover both augmented reality as well as virtual reality. Yes, someone says there's also an Atlanta, Georgia game developer conference. Yes, and is far, far, far more affordable than GDC. And this is at Siege. So you can go to Siege, SIEGE.con.net. I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that. Also, Atlanta has a booming game developer scene. So yeah, you folks have quite a bit going on. So I would definitely start there and then work your way up. So coming back to these slides, my peer, Nick Landry, he also works in commercial software engineering with me, but he's in New Jersey, is specifically focused on AR and VR right now. So that's why I grabbed these slides from him, because he's working with the latest and greatest, both for game developers as well as a lot of commercial applications. So let's take a look. We have what's called physical reality and virtual reality, right? Physical, the state of things as they actually exist through human senses without technology. Pen, a paper, these things that I use every day. Then we have virtual reality, which are artificially man-made, created sensory experiences of people, right? So they might include things like sight, touch, hearing, smell. So what we want to do is blend the two together into what's called mixed reality. So physical is the world as we see it. Virtual is, you're essentially sucked into or trapped into a world where you can't see past it, right? So think the Lawnmower Man. And then finally, mixed reality, which is essentially a blending of both worlds. So it's like an overlay that you have into your physical reality. So the mixed reality spectrum, right? We have physical on the far side. That's where AR, for the most part, is today. On the far right, we have digital. So think of Oculus and things of that nature. I want to go back a bit. That's where VR is. So once you're in that, you're not really aware of what's happening outside. Like if I was to put these devices on, a VR device on at my desk, I wouldn't be able to see anything else that's happening around me. Where something like when I have a HoloLens on and I sit at my desk, what I'll often do is I'll put Netflix on, put it above all of my monitors, and this way only I can see and hear that Netflix screen while I'm working on my desktop. And then we have mixed reality, again, which is quite a blend of these two, which can be both see-through or opaque. So Microsoft has several devices. I'm sure you've heard of the HoloLens already. These developer kits are available for $3,000 a piece. I hate that these slides keep moving on their own. So these slides, the HoloLens is about $3,000 a piece for the developer unit. And you got to imagine it's essentially a self-contained PC. And with that, you're just going to connect it directly to your computer, and wirelessly they're going to communicate with one another. So you can write C, C++ code with DirectX, or you could use something like Unity to talk directly to that. Actually, give me a moment here. I'm going to stop these slides from auto-advancing. Just a moment. Because this is going to drive me crazy if it keeps doing this. Timing. Sorry about that. I didn't realize they were going to go on their own. There we go. Okay. So it looks like there's just a couple of slides here that auto-advanced. And they were there for 7 seconds. Good. You notice, because I don't always go through presentation mode, so I think that's why. There we go. So let's go back a couple. All right. So we have our Microsoft HoloLens. Again, you can buy this today, start making use of it. We also have what are called HMDs, head-mounted displays, which we were showcasing at, again, GDC earlier this year, which are made by a lot of our partners, Acer, Asus, Samsung, Lenovo, Dell, HP. So there's a variety of these. And you take a look at some of them right here. So these are self-contained hardware devices that also have controller, 2 high-resolution screens at 1440, 95-degree horizontal field of view, and display refresh rate of up to 90 hertz. So that's the native draw. And you might look at 90 hertz and think, oh, I don't even understand what that is. Look at it as essentially being 90 frames per second in each eye. So typically when you watch something like a film, that is often shot 24 frames a second. If you're playing a console game, that's usually about 30 frames a second. So it might look a little more, the animations may not appear as smooth. If you're playing on a high-end PC, you may have 60 frames a second, or even many monitors can go more than that. I have one in front of me here that goes 100 frames a second. It'll make those animations look silky, silky smooth. But what they found for things like VR is that anything under 60 frames a second, people start to get very, very nauseous. It has to do with the cochlea, the thing in your ear that controls balance for your brain. So if we have these choppy frame rates, people get nauseous, and that's why you find that these VR devices have a very high frame rate. You also have built-in audio and microphone support through a 3.5mm jack. So again, these are devices that connect to your PC, and look at them as essentially extended monitors for your VR applications. So again, we have several devices here: Lenovo, HP, Acer. There's something for everyone, from more of a bargain price to something that's very, very high end. So now let's get into the nitty gritty about developing for some of this. And I particularly highlight Unity here because that's what we seem to have most of our experience and success with, is either C++ and DirectX, or a lot of people who, again, are low-level programmers, they're going to write that way. But for most developers, we're going to find they're using Unity. And what's interesting is you may use Unity and either run it on this device itself, or what often people do is they will have a server up in the cloud running a Unity client, which then streams video to something like a HoloLens. So now you can really take advantage of those nice GPUs that NVIDIA offers in the cloud and not have to worry so much about how strong is this device, because as long as it can play back video with low latency, you can have the GPU in the cloud do all of the crunching for you. So again, this is Windows 10, UWP, one platform, multiple Windows devices. I don't know if you saw, but we had Build yesterday, which is our annual external developer conference. So we had tons of announcements there to give you a good idea of what's on our roadmap for the next year. We covered quite a bit about this. So UWP makes it pretty easy to get started with HoloLens, either for holographic, right? For holographic headsets, that's our HoloLens. Again, when you think holographic, think see-through, something I can overlay onto my physical world, or Windows Desktop, which should be exactly what it sounds like, your PC, your laptop, your Surface, for immersive headsets. Again, for those things we have targeted on the bottom. So a lot of those tools, I mentioned Visual Studio before, DirectX for graphics, gamepad, sound. That Dev Center is a web portal that you can go to submit your games, get more information. And then Game Middleware, which is a number of tools that you can use. And again, the most popular ones we seem to find are things like Monogame, Unreal, and Unity, which we have right here. C++ developers, you can go to aka.ms/mr-directx to get more information. We also have a fork of the Unreal Engine, and I was involved with this for quite a while. So you can go to the Unreal Engine's GitHub repository, and there's an open source fork that the community has been contributing to all the time for mixed reality and UWP. So if you like C++, both fantastic resources to start with. If you like C#, we have, again, Unity, SharpDX, which is a C# wrapper for DirectX and C++. We have Monogame, where there's no support yet, but it's getting there. And then UroSharp, which I have no experience with at this point, so I can't really talk on it. But also we have what's called Babylon.js, which is a fantastic WebGL and open source library available not only TypeScript or JavaScript, but also TypeScript. And then Holo.js, which I haven't used yet, but it seems to be an official Microsoft product. Oh, no, it says not officially supported by Microsoft. Okay, the evolution of device I/O, input and output. So let's look at it this way. We have app experience that you build, right? You have models, materials, textures, shaders, sounds, scripts. For Windows Mixed Reality, you're going to need something like gaze input. Gaze is where are your eyes currently looking? You're going to want to keep track of that. Gesture input, right? As someone moves their hands and goes to click on things, you're going to want to keep track of where their hands or fingers are pointed. Voice input, you could say something like, hey, insert AI assistant name, play music, or call this or do that. You have spatial anchors, right? Spatial mapping, which is when the game or the application is aware of where you are, both in local space as well as world space. I'd mentioned briefly how I use Netflix before with my HoloLens. Often what I'll do is I can pin a screen or an application to a wall in world space, and I'll take the Netflix app, pin it just above my monitors, and then when I turn away, the screen, as far as I'm concerned, the Netflix app is no longer overlaid on top of my HoloLens. It stays where I had pinned it on the wall. So if I don't want to use it as some kind of HUD or heads-up display, that's fine. I can leave it on a wall. Alternatively, I can have it pinned permanently to the corner of my HoloLens as I walk around. So that's what they say when they mean spatial mapping. And finally, with this mixed reality toolkit, which we also provide, it's open source, it'll handle quite a bit of this work for you. So if you go to GitHub and then mixed reality toolkit, you'll find there are things like cursor prefabs, sharing prefabs, spatial prefabs. These are prefabs are predefined functions or objects that are created in both Unity and now in Unreal Engine that do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So I'd encourage you to take a look at this mixed reality toolkit, which I'll show right now. It's open source, collection of scripts and components. We are constantly adding to this. You're more than welcome to add to this yourself. Contains a lot of things like input, spatial mapping, spatial sound, utilities, build scripts for this. So you're going to make sure you have the mixed reality toolkit release that matches your Unity version when you're using this. So one of the many benefits of Unity is that you can have multiple versions installed side by side without conflicting with one another, and I'd encourage you to do it at this point. So again, you can go to github.com/Microsoft Mixed Reality Toolkit. So you don't necessarily need to have a HoloLens to even get started today. I've used this a bit as well. This is the HoloLens emulator, and what this allows you to do is through Visual Studio, as long as your machine has 8 GB of RAM, you have 64-bit Windows, and at least a dedicated GPU with Windows 10, you can use what's called hardware virtualization to build your HoloLens application and have it run on the desktop. So you don't need to buy the hardware right away. You can test it out and kind of get started on your own. All right, coming home full circle here. Getting started with this mixed reality toolkit, I'd pointed to the GitHub repo before. Again, you can contribute to the project. This is a great way not only for you to get involved with Microsoft, but to show off perhaps to other developers or other potential employers, hey, this is the kind of work that's available that I'm able to do. If you're doing this for free to start, people are going to really think, wow, if he's doing this for free or she's doing this for free, what kind of work would they do if they're really getting paid for this to make this kind of stuff happen? We also have a number of resources for you to learn from. So things like the Holographic Academy. We have a companion kit. We have a number of demos and examples you can use as well. So coming to the very end, this is my last slide. We have developer resources. So you can go to aka.ms/mr for mixed reality, and I'll bring you to our developer portal where we have tons and tons and tons of tutorials. So I'll be honest, I don't have many resources internally available to me for learning the latest and the greatest because we expose them to the public as soon as possible. So us as Microsoft developers learn the same way for the most part as the public does. So we are constantly the ones, they call it dog fooding, which means to use our own tools, our own documentation, and constantly make upgrades and changes to it. So we're learning alongside with you. And that's where I found most of these resources have been extremely helpful. So with that in mind, I want to know, do we have any questions? Thank you.
Microphone, not this nice microphone over here. So we're gonna have to come up here. No, it's not your fault. It's our fault. We're gonna have to come up here, and or I can relay the question on in. So if you want to come over here, stand in line, or just really yell out pretty loudly, that'll be great. And I'll start with the first question, Dave, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Well, actually, let me make an announcement first. Is that the Microsoft Store has most of AR and VR tools we talked about. No HoloLens here, but pretty much everything else. So if you want to try them out tonight, when we're done with this. They have them available for you to check out the capabilities. But I'll start with the first question, going back to the Xbox side of it before I offer it to everyone else. So, Dave, we have a number of PC and mobile game developers here. I think there's only one current console developer here. So, for folks who are currently working in PC and/or mobile, what would you recommend they keep in mind when developing for Xbox specifically, but for consoles in general for the first time?
Yes. Oh, what to keep in mind? I would say scope and scale more than anything. Start small. The first game I ever made was a Pong game, and this was by the suggestion of many people in the Xbox Live indie game developer community. I would say start with something as simple as Pong. Sounds ridiculous, but the reason is there are several actually. The first is everyone can understand that game's basics. So it's very easy for you to explain it to someone else. There's a number of very straightforward problems to solve that you will have to solve nearly identical ones in other games. Physics. How does the ball react when it hits the wall? How should I have, what kind of acceleration should I have when it bounces off the wall? How do I handle two inputs? About screens, right? I need a start screen, a pause screen. How do I advance these things? You can create a leaderboard very easily with something like Pong. So as ridiculous as it sounds, I would say start with something like Pong and go from there. Even if you've already created games before, and I say that because you're going to see how much of a challenge it still is to get games to work across multiple platforms, because things may change somewhat slightly across the platforms, but they may change very largely as well. By that I mean, not every platform has the same content pipeline, right? How do your assets get loaded in? What kind of assets can they display, right? Maybe you have a game you want to release on a standard Xbox. 1080p is the highest resolution there. But going from there, what if you go to Xbox One X, right? You have the opportunity to display 4K assets. How are they going to stretch and scale? Well, if you start working on these things early or think about something as simple as Pong, you have a great starting point. So I'd say that start with the bare bones, very simple, something like Pong, get it to work on as many platforms as possible. And then from there, I would really start to develop the game that I'd want to do.
All right, so if folks have questions, please start raising your hands. And also, those of you in chat, please also feel on any of our streams, please go ahead and forward your questions. Brian Miller is going to pass all of those on to me. And really quick, Dave, since we do have a lot of the headsets here you talked about, what do you think are good implementations of design that people should look at that they might have here in the store to check out?
Implementation design, like as far as like
mixed
which
reality
headset?
Yeah, well, a game on the headset. What do you think would be a good one that they should check out?
I would say really dive into a lot of what's on Valve's store through Steam. Right, they have awesome examples there. There's a lot of first-person games that you'll see. They could be hit or miss, and I say this for a couple of reasons, right? When you start moving around in a first-person game, you can get very, very sick. So something like Oblivion, they recently updated. Maybe it's Skyrim. I can't know which one. Skyrim is newer, yeah. So Skyrim from Bethesda, they recently updated that with a lot of VR support on a number of platforms. But you'll find that people may get sick along the way. In that case, for first-person games, I would say something like Robo Recall from Epic Games is fantastic because the animations are silky smooth, and they use what's called teleporting, right? Kind of point and click, and that will dash you across the room to those points. So I would say look at an example like that for first person, but also consider, I know there's a demo, I can't remember who specifically made it, but it was basically like you're doing the Death Star run through an X-Wing. So games that have vehicles, I find, work very, very well for virtual reality simply because it's not as jarring seeing in a vehicle and moving around than it is as you playing first person as though you're an individual, a person, because you're thinking in your head, oh, my feet should be moving, but I'm not going anywhere, but somehow my eyes are telling me that I am. So off the top of my head, I'd say Robo Recall is probably the best example of a VR game I've seen at this point.
They have it here on the Oculus, so we can check it out there and elsewhere.
Definitely.
For liaison. A question for our streamers. Obviously, Microsoft already incorporates Mixer into the Xbox as things stand. For game developers looking to incorporate streaming more, especially on console devices, what recommendations do you have for them, and what should they keep in mind there?
Oh, okay. All about interactivity. So think about the aha moment. That's what I look at, is the moment that makes someone want to play your game and go like, oh, this is awesome, right? So look at, again, I was watching my little guy play Fortnite this morning with Thanos. As soon as someone turns into Thanos, finds that Infinity Gauntlet, they're going to have crazy amount of power, right? They're extremely overpowered. They can jump 300 feet into the ground, smash down, take people out, right? That is awesome to watch. See someone that powerful, and then previously everyone's fighting each other. They stop fighting each other, turn, and just go straight for Thanos. That's a cool moment that people want to see. So those big moments are really effective. But also, if you're playing some sort of team game, right, what's really going to change the dynamic there? If you have 5 versus 5, I play a lot of MOBAs, like Heroes of the Storm. Those moments that are kind of building up, and then all 4 people or 5 people are taken out at once, those are great too. So that's what I would be looking into if I'm talking about streaming. And then finally, one last example that I saw would be... I can't remember what the name of this title was off the top of my head, but I had a coworker who essentially built into his NES system the ability to view memory in real time on an NES game. He did this for Contra, and we as viewers could change or alter his game. So picture this. I would tell you, go to a website. It might be davescontragame.com. You go to that website, and on your mobile device, every second you sit there, you're gathering points, right? Very similar to what Streamer does or Mixer does. So if I'm a developer, this is what I'm doing right now. I'm making a simple website that allows me to gather points by simply sitting there. And then once I've gathered enough points, I can make changes or affect the outcome of the game. So Contra, side-scrolling 2D platformer, I might say, if you've gathered 30 points, waited for 30 seconds, then I'm going to give you a random weapon. So on my screen, my phone, I hit random weapon, removes 30 points from me, and now in your game, as we're all watching you, you now have a random weapon. So he did that for an NES game, and it was so fun to watch and interact with, where not only is he playing, but he's playing with the audience too. And based on the kind of person he is, right, maybe you like, you know, who he or she is, you might want to help him out, give him an extra life. So boom, I waited 30 seconds, hit the button, give him a life. Or if I don't like them, maybe I have a bad attitude, or I just want to troll for a day, maybe I can hit a button, take away a life. So anything that's going to have interactivity in real time, I think is huge.
Excellent. All right. We've got one question about play testing for the Xbox. If you have a limited number of dev kits, you were talking about being able to turn an Xbox into a test environment. How difficult is that to have just someone handling QA do?
To turn it... Oh, very easy. I mean, you could do it in probably 15, 20 minutes. There's actually step-by-step instructions on how to do it. I think on xbox.com/dev. I've done it several times before. But you could just flip it over in just a few minutes. There's like a setting on the console itself that'll flip it right over. So you can go out and buy these $300 $300 units or $400 Xbox, and you're good to go. Yeah, someone's asking about the webcam. I'm trying to figure it out because I can see myself sharing the webcam on Skype, but on here, on the screen itself, I can't see. So I'm trying to figure out like what my best bet would be here.
You exist.
Yeah.
You are a human being.
So, I know. I'm trying to see sharing desktop, turn off webcam, turn on. I don't know.
So Microsoft itself has user groups for developers. You talk a little about those. I know those tend to be regional.
User group support. Yeah, so I mean, we have things like .NET meetups throughout the country. Oh, there we go. Now you got me on there. Okay. Yeah. So what you see and what I see are two completely different things. So it's weird. Yeah, so there are user groups all over the place. We have what are called reactors across the country, actually across the world. We used to have one here in Philadelphia, but we have one in Seattle, San Francisco, New York. So you can go there at any point, and you can create your own meetup or user group. You can meet fellow developers there. We also have learner hardware and cloud developer advocates that you can sit down and work with. So these are all at what are called reactors in the country. And then we're also very supportive of both our MVPs, who are not employees, but people who work alongside and very tightly with our communities. I was an MVP for Xbox before I became an employee. So we work very closely with them to help put on a lot of these events. So we have Philly.net in my immediate area, who hosts a user group and meetup every few weeks. And I'm sure that there are several in Atlanta. Actually, I know that we have, not what's called a reactor, but a Microsoft Innovation Center in right by Georgia State, right in the Flatiron Building, I believe, on the first floor. Yeah, so that'd be a great place for you to start.
All right. Any last questions from the floor before I ask mine? My last question. All right, my last question. Dave, when might you be in Atlanta next? Presenting.
Ooh, good question. I used to be there all the time, but the next time, I'm not quite sure just yet. Hopefully at some point this summer, but I would love to come down and try to line it up with the time that you were all there so we could do something.
Yep.
Or see if we can get me over to Siege. When is Siege again?
Siege is October 4th to 7th, 2018 at the
Beautiful.
Marriott Northwest
Let's do it.
Atlanta. Yeah, we'd love to have you down for that. Obviously, Ian will be out there, looked at a whole bunch of the Microsoft team. Gersh was great last year. Gersh Page.
Oh, you met Gersh. Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah, Gersh has been very involved with Xbox for a long time. He is extremely technical. Now he does quite a bit of work with Mixer. Yeah, he is a fantastic resource for anything Xbox.
All right. Any last questions? Then with that, thank you very much, Dave, joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Long flight in Pennsylvania. And we'll be posting this video up very soon. So you should ask him for slides, but you'll have his slides with the video.
Yeah.
So take care, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
First one to spot the enemy gets a beer. Get in there and blow them away. Scratch one of the bastards.
Bloody VC, over there.